The weight of $1 billion felt surprisingly light. It was just a stack of premium-grade paper, 20 pages thick, held together by a simple brass clip. To Leo Vance, however, it was the anchor that would stop his world from drifting into oblivion. He sat in a plush leather booth at Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive that the silence itself seemed to have a price tag. Across the table, his partner, David Chen, was practically vibrating with nervous energy, his eyes darting from the door to the contract and back again. "He's late," David whispered, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. "A man investing $1 billion earns the right to be a little late," Leo replied, his voice a low hum of forced calm. He ran a hand through his already disheveled brown hair. He hadn't slept in 2 days, his mind a frantic carousel of blueprints, financial projections, and, most importantly, a picture of his daughter, Lily. Lily was 7, she had his eyes, wide and curious, and a laugh that could make flowers bloom in winter. She also had a rare genetic disorder that was slowly, methodically stealing her strength. The doctors at St. Jude's had a new experimental treatment. A medical miracle with a price tag to match. This deal, the Helios project, wasn't just about architectural ambition for Leo. It was about buying his daughter more sunrises. The Helios project was his masterpiece, a self-sustaining, eco-friendly skyscraper that would redefine the city's skyline. It was audacious, brilliant, and had attracted the attention of a notoriously reclusive and aggressive investor, the head of Finch Global Enterprises. They had never met the man himself, dealing only with his lawyers and accountants. Today was the final signing, a formality. A hush fell over the restaurant as the entrance doors swung open. A man strode in, flanked by 2 imposing figures in dark suits. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Leo's car. His hair was silver at the temples, styled with surgical precision. But it was his face that made the air in Leo's lungs turn to ice. The sharp jawline, the piercing, cold blue eyes. It was a face he hadn't seen in 15 years, a face he saw every night in his nightmares. Alistair Finch. David stood up, hand outstretched. "Mr. Finch, an honor. I'm David Chen, and this is the lead architect, Leo Vance." Alistair's eyes locked onto Leo's, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. He ignored David completely, his gaze a physical force that pinned Leo to his seat. "Vance," he said, the name dripping with a history Leo could feel in his bones. "It has been a long, long time." He slid into the booth opposite Leo, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. He gestured for the contract. David, flustered but eager to please, slid it across the polished mahogany table. Alistair picked it up, his long fingers caressing the edge of the paper. He didn't read it. He just stared at Leo, that chilling smile never leaving his face. "The Helios project," Alistair mused, his voice smooth as velvet, but with an edge of sharpened steel. Ambitious, grand. Everything a man could want to build his legacy on. Everything a desperate little man would need to save his family. Leo's blood ran cold. How did he know? "I do my homework, Vance," Alistair continued, as if reading his mind. "I know all about your little girl. Lily, isn't it? Such a fragile name. I understand her treatment is expensive." A young waitress approached their table, her name tag reading Clara. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her voice cheerful. Alistair didn't even look at her. He waved a dismissive hand. "Leave us." Clara froze for a second, taken aback by his rudeness, before nodding and retreating, though she kept a concerned eye on the palpable tension at the table. Leo found his voice, a ragged whisper. "Alistair, what is this?" "This," Alistair said, picking up a pen from the inside of his jacket, a Mont Blanc fountain pen that gleamed under the soft lights, "is about old debts." He uncapped the pen with a deliberate click. He flipped to the last page of the contract, to the 2 empty signature lines. He signed his name with a flourish, a series of sharp, aggressive strokes. For a breathtaking second, relief washed over Leo. It was done. The money was secured. Lily was safe. David let out a sigh he hadn't realized he was holding. Alistair slid the signed contract back to the center of the table. He leaned back, steepling his fingers under his chin. "There, it's done. $1 billion, the deal of a lifetime. Your daughter gets her treatment. Your firm is saved. You get to be the hero. Leo reached for the contract, his hand trembling. This was it. Salvation. But Alistair's hand shot out, slamming down on the papers, pinning them to the table. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated loathing. "You know, Leo," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "I remember a time when you had nothing. A scholarship kid with worn-out shoes and a sketchbook full of dreams. Dreams you were willing to build on the backs of your friends." "That's not what happened, Alistair," Leo pleaded, his mind reeling. "It was a university competition." "Don't you dare," Alistair snarled, his voice low but carrying the force of a thunderclap. The few other patrons in the restaurant glanced over. "You stole my design. You took my future, my passion, and you passed it off as your own. That scholarship, that career, that was supposed to be mine." He held Leo's gaze, his blue eyes burning with a 15-year-old fire. He picked up the contract, the $1 billion of hope. He held it in his two hands, the signature of Alistair Finch gleaming on the final page. And then, with slow, deliberate precision, he began to tear it in half. The sound of ripping paper was louder than a gunshot in the silent restaurant. It was a sound of finality, of utter destruction. David gasped, a strangled noise of disbelief. Leo just stared, his heart seizing in his chest. Alistair wasn't done. He tore the two halves into quarters, then eighths. He kept ripping, his movements methodical and vicious, until the billion-dollar Helios project, Lily's only hope, was nothing but a pile of confetti in his hands. He opened his palms and let the shredded paper rain down onto the table, a blizzard of broken promises and shattered dreams. Some of the pieces fluttered to the floor, landing near the shoes of the waitress, Clara, who stood frozen a few feet away, a water pitcher held forgotten in her hand, her eyes wide with shock and pity. Alistair Finch stood up, smoothing down his perfect suit jacket. He looked down at Leo, a man broken and buried under an avalanche of paper scraps. "Now you have nothing," Alistair said, his voice calm and devoid of all emotion. "Just like I did 15 years ago. Welcome back to the bottom, Vance. I trust you'll find it familiar." He turned and walked away, his bodyguards falling into step behind him, leaving Leo Vance sitting in a storm of his own ruin. The silence Alistair left in his wake was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It pressed down on Leo, filled his ears and stole the air from his lungs. David was the first to move, his hands shaking as he reached out and touched one of the paper shreds on the table, as if to confirm it was real. He looked at Leo, his face a mask of horror and confusion. "Leo, what was that? Who was that?" David's voice was a hoarse whisper. "He said you stole—" "What did he mean?" Leo couldn't answer. He couldn't move. His gaze was fixed on the white confetti scattered across the dark wood. Each piece was a shard of his daughter's future. One shred was a year of her life, another was a Christmas morning he would never get. Another, her high school graduation. He saw it all being ripped apart, again and again, in the echo of that terrible sound. The waitress, Clara, cautiously approached the table. She had seen her share of drama working in a place like Aurelia. Breakups, business deals gone sour. But this was different. This was cruelty, distilled to its purest form. "Sir," she said softly, her voice gentle. Are you all right? Can I get you some water?" Leo looked up at her, but his eyes were vacant, seeing through her, through the restaurant, to a hospital room where a little girl with his eyes was waiting for her daddy to come home and tell her everything was going to be okay. He pushed himself up from the booth, his movements stiff and robotic. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the table, sending a few more paper scraps fluttering to the floor. "Leo, wait!" David called after him, but Leo was already walking away, a zombie-like automaton navigating a world that had just lost all its color. He didn't remember the walk to the parking garage or the drive home. The city lights blurred into meaningless streaks of neon. His mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by the shock. The only thing that existed was the image of Alistair's face, the victorious, hateful glint in his eyes as the paper tore. He unlocked the door to his small apartment. The babysitter, a kind college student named Maria, was on the couch, reading a textbook. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, Mr. Vance. She was an angel. Fell asleep about an hour ago," she said. "How did the big meeting go?" Leo couldn't form the words. He just reached into his wallet, pulled out more cash than he owed her, and pressed it into her hand. "Thank you, Maria. Good night." Her smile faltered at his tone, but she saw the look on his face and didn't press. "Good night, Mr. Vance. I hope everything's okay." He waited until he heard the door click shut behind her before he allowed himself to collapse. He didn't fall to his knees. He just leaned his back against the door and slid down to the floor, his head in his hands. The silence of the apartment was different from the silence in the restaurant. This one was filled with the soft, rhythmic hum of Lily's oxygen machine in the next room. It was the soundtrack of his failure. He stayed there for what felt like hours, adrift in a sea of despair. How could he have been so naive? He had known Alistair Finch was the investor's name, but it was a common enough name. He never imagined it could be him. The Alistair he knew was a brilliant, intense, and sometimes arrogant fellow student. Not this monster, this corporate titan with a heart of stone and a memory forged in poison. He never thought that ember of collegiate resentment could have been nursed for 15 years, fanned into a raging inferno of hate capable of incinerating $1 billion deal just for the satisfaction of watching him burn. Finally, he pushed himself to his feet and walked into Lily's room. Her nightlight cast a soft glow on her face as she slept peacefully. Her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. He knelt by her bedside, a tear he hadn't known he was holding back, sliding down his cheek. He had failed her. The next few days were a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. Leo ignored the flood of calls and emails from David, from his employees, from the bank. Each notification was another shovelful of dirt on the grave of his career. His firm, Vance & Chen Architecture, was imploding. Without the Finch deal, their other lines of credit were frozen. They had missed payroll. One afternoon, David showed up at his door, his face gaunt and his eyes bloodshot. "They're padlocking the office, Leo," he said, his voice cracking. "We're bankrupt. 15 years of work, gone." Leo just nodded, staring at a crack in the pavement. "I'm sorry, David." "Sorry? Is that all you can say?" David's voice rose, a mixture of anger and despair. "What happened in that restaurant? What did that man have against you? You destroyed us, Leo. You brought this curse upon us." Leo didn't have the energy to argue. David was right. This was his fault. His past had reached out and strangled his present. "I'm sorry," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. David stared at him for a long moment, the anger draining from his face, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He shook his head and walked away without another word. The partnership was over. The friendship, it seemed, was too. The final blow came a week later, during Lily's checkup. Dr. Evans, a woman with kind eyes and a brutally honest tongue, sat him down in her office. "Leo," she began, her tone gentle but firm, "the new trial has a limited number of spots. We need a commitment and a funding guarantee within 30 days. After that, the window closes. We can continue with her current palliative care, but—" She didn't need to finish. The unspoken words hung in the air. Time was running out. That was the moment the despair broke. It didn't wash away, it shattered like glass, and the shards reformed into something else. Something cold, hard, and sharp. As he left the hospital, an eviction notice taped to his apartment door greeted him. It was the final insult. He ripped it from the wood, and in his mind he saw not the paper in his hand, but the shredded contract on the restaurant table. He was an architect. He designed systems that could withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. Alistair Finch was a force of nature, yes, but even a hurricane has a path. Even an earthquake has a fault line. His mind, for the first time in weeks, began to work. It became a drafting table for a different kind of structure, a trap. His first move was not one of passion, but of cold calculation. He spent 2 days without sleep, not in despair, but in furious research. He didn't look at blueprints, he looked at corporate structures. He dissected Finch Global's board of directors, their histories, their loyalties, their public statements. He was looking for a crack in the monolithic facade. He found it in Eleanor Shaw. She was the longest-serving board member, appointed long before Alistair's influence became absolute. She was famously sharp, an old guard executive who valued integrity over optics. More importantly, Leo found a transcript of a shareholder meeting from 5 years prior where she had subtly but firmly questioned a risky acquisition pushed by Alistair, citing a lack of due diligence. She had been overruled, and the acquisition had later soured. She was a woman who was not afraid to be right, even if it made her unpopular. She was the keystone. Only then did he go to find Clara. He waited outside Aurelia after her shift, a gaunt figure in the alleyway. She flinched when she saw him, but her expression softened from fear to pity. "Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry about what happened," she whispered. "You saw it all?" Leo said, his voice low and intense. "Clara, I need your help." She hesitated, wringing her hands. "He's a powerful man. I have a family." "So do I," Leo cut in, his voice cracking for a moment. "That's why I'm here." He dropped something when he stood up. It rolled under the table. "I saw you pick it up." Her eyes widened. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. "I was going to turn it in." Leo took it, his fingers surprisingly steady. He opened the clasp. On one side was a faded photo of a severe-looking older man. On the other, a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded it. It was a miniature blueprint, a design for a complex mechanical watch escapement. It was signed with the initials M.F. Marcus Finch, Alistair's father. "There's more," Clara said, her resolve hardening at the desperate hope in his eyes. "The restaurant has cameras. My manager, Mr. Dubois, he's terrified. He was going to delete the footage. I told him destroying evidence for a man like Finch could be far more dangerous than keeping it. I bought you 48 hours. "Clara, thank you," Leo said, a flicker of light in his hollow eyes. "You may have just saved my daughter's life." His next stop was a quiet retirement home upstate. Professor Albright, the former dean of the architecture school, looked frail, a pale shadow of the academic titan Leo remembered. When Leo explained why he was there, the old man began to weep. "I knew it," Albright whispered, his hands trembling. "Marcus Finch. He was a major benefactor. He came to me after the fellowship submissions. He said your design was too similar to Alistair's. He implied you had cheated. He pressured the committee. He said if his son didn't win, the new library wing would be re-evaluated." The professor looked up, his eyes swimming with a 15-year-old guilt. "I was a coward, Leo. I let him poison the well. I knew your design was superior, more elegant. But I buckled. I've lived with it ever since." "I don't need an apology, Professor," Leo said, his voice cold as steel. "I need a sworn, notarized affidavit detailing every word Marcus Finch said to you." Armed with the footage, the locket, and the professor's confession, Leo began to construct his trap. He sent a single encrypted email to a private address he had found for Eleanor Shaw. The subject, Structural Integrity of Finch Global. The body contained only the video file from Aurelia and Professor Albright's affidavit. He asked for nothing, demanded nothing. He simply presented the evidence of the rot at the core of her company. 24 agonizing hours later, he received a one-word reply. "Proceed." It was the green light he needed. He leaked an anonymous tip to a notorious financial gossip columnist, a story of a brilliant architect whose life-saving project for his sick daughter was mysteriously and brutally killed by the reclusive Alistair Finch. The story was vague on details, but rich in sympathy. It was the bait. Alistair, furious at being painted as a heartless villain, swallowed it whole. Finch Global announced a special press conference. The topic, Philanthropy, the Future, and Setting the Record Straight. The night before the press conference, Leo made his final move. Using the clue of the mechanical blueprint and his memory of Alistair's past obsessions, he found a private forum for horology enthusiasts where Alistair, under a pseudonym, was a frequent poster. Leo created an anonymous account and sent him a single private message. A high-resolution image of the watch escapement blueprint from the locket. The subject line read, "A father's design." The response was almost instantaneous, a demand for a phone call. Leo used a burner phone. "Who is this?" Alistair's voice was a venomous snarl stripped of his public polish. "Where did you get that?" "Your father was a brilliant man," Leo said, his voice digitally altered, unrecognizable. A shame his greatest design was built on a lie. He listened as Alistair, believing he was speaking to a blackmailer, a ghost from his father's past, unleashed 15 years of poison. He confessed everything: his father's manipulation, the pressure to live up to an impossible legacy, the burning, misdirected hatred for Leo, and the sublime, sick pleasure he took in destroying him. Leo recorded every single word. The auditorium at Finch Tower was packed with a ravenous press corps, lured by the scent of scandal. Alistair took the stage, a vision of power and control. He basked in the flash of cameras, his posture radiating a defiant arrogance. He began with practiced charm, speaking of corporate responsibility, then turned to the matter at hand. "There have been whispers," he said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity, a perfectly calibrated performance of a benevolent king bothered by peasant gossip, regarding a failed project and its architect, Mr. Leo Vance. A sad story, to be sure. A man whose desperation led him to overpromise on a foundationally flawed vision. My company could not, in good conscience, invest in a project destined for failure. He paused, letting the lie settle in the air. However, to show there are no hard feelings, and in the spirit of compassion, Finch Global will be making a generous anonymous donation to the hospital caring for Mr. Vance's daughter. The room was silent, captivated by the sheer audacity of the spin. He was not just denying his cruelty, he was monetizing it for public relations. "Is there anything else?" Alistair asked, a smirk playing on his lips as he scanned the sea of journalists. "I have something," a voice called out from the back of the room. The words were not shouted, but they cut through the polite murmur with surgical precision. Alistair's smirk froze, the muscles around his mouth tightening. A flicker of irritation crossed his face as he scanned the crowd. Then he saw him, Leo Vance, walking calmly down the center aisle. He didn't look like a victim pleading for scraps. He looked like a demolition expert arriving at a condemned building. His suit was rumpled, his face was pale, but his eyes burned with a cold, structural integrity that seemed to hold him impossibly erect. He carried a single slim tablet. "Mr. Vance," Alistair said, his voice dropping an octave, turning to ice. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to his security team. "This is a private corporate event. Security, please escort this man out." Two hulking men in dark suits detached themselves from the wall and began to move toward Leo. But Leo held up a hand, and his voice, clear and amplified by the room's impeccable acoustics, stopped them in their tracks. "You said you wanted to set the record straight, Alistair. So do I. You called my vision foundationally flawed. An interesting choice of words for an architect. Before you have me thrown out, I'd like to show everyone here the foundation of your judgment." He tapped the screen of the tablet. The massive 40-foot display behind Alistair, which had been showing the Finch Global logo, flickered to life. The room let out a collective gasp. It was the grainy, time-stamped footage from Aurelia's security camera. There was no audio, but the visual narrative was devastating. The press, who had been listening with polite skepticism, now leaned forward as one, their phones and cameras held aloft like weapons. They watched the cruel smile on Alistair's face. They saw his hand slam down on the contract. And then they saw the methodical, vicious act of destruction as he ripped the billion-dollar document, Lily's Hope, into a blizzard of confetti. The pure, theatrical cruelty of it was hypnotic. Alistair's face went from tanned confidence to a waxy, ashen mask. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. "This is an outrage," he stammered, his voice losing its silken quality, becoming thin and reedy. "That footage is clearly doctored. A pathetic fabrication by a desperate man." "Is it a fabrication, Alistair?" Leo's voice was dangerously quiet. "Or is it just an image of a man whose entire life is a fabrication?" Leo took another step forward. "Let's talk about your father, Marcus Finch." At the mention of his father's name, a genuine tremor ran through Alistair. "My father has nothing to do with this." "He has everything to do with this," Leo countered, his gaze unwavering. "He was a man who believed in building legacies, wasn't he? So much so, he put a blueprint for one inside your locket." The color drained completely from Alistair's face. He subconsciously touched his chest, where the locket used to be. The press corps erupted in a frenzy of whispers and flashing cameras. You see, Leo continued, his voice resonating with the authority of absolute truth. The foundation isn't just flawed, Alistair. It's rotten. It was built on a lie your father told 15 years ago, and you were just the gilded facade he built on top of it. Slander, lies, Alistair shrieked, his composure shattering completely. He pointed a trembling finger at Leo. He's insane. Remove him. Let's listen to the insane man's evidence, Leo said calmly. The video on the screen vanished, replaced by a simple audio waveform, pulsing like a dark heartbeat. And then Alistair's own voice, the raw, unguarded, venomous voice from the recorded phone call, erupted from the speakers, filling every corner of the vast auditorium. I destroyed you, Leo. It felt good. It was the only thing I've ever done that felt truly my own. He pushed me, always. Told me I had to be better than the scholarship kid. Told me you stole from me, that you were nothing, a parasite. I became the monster he wanted me to be, and I enjoyed it. God, did I enjoy watching you break. The recording laid his soul bare, a pitiable, poisoned thing, twisted by jealousy and paternal pressure. When it ended, the silence in the room was a physical weight, crushing and absolute. Every eye was on Alistair. He was no longer a titan of industry on a stage. He was a specimen pinned to a board, his inner ugliness exposed for the world to dissect. He was trembling violently now, his perfectly tailored suit looking like a costume on a scarecrow. Leo tapped the tablet a final time. Professor Albright's sworn notarized affidavit filled the screen, every word of his confession legible even from the back row. The trap was sprung. The evidence was absolute. The load-bearing walls of Alistair's life had been systematically demolished, and the whole rotten structure was collapsing in on him. The Helios project was never flawed, Leo said, his voice ringing with finality. The only thing flawed was the man who judged it. The only thing stolen 15 years ago was my future, Alistair. Your father was the thief, and you were just the beneficiary of the crime. Alistair stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing, a fish drowning in air. His empire of lies had been reduced to digital rubble around him. The flashes of cameras were no longer adoring. They were like lightning strikes in a storm, capturing his public crucifixion. He stumbled backward, a puppet with its strings cut. His own executives, who minutes before had been nodding along to his speech, now looked at him with a mixture of horror and cold calculation. He was no longer an asset. He was a liability of catastrophic proportions. As his security team, now looking utterly lost, finally moved to escort him off the stage, a clear, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Let him stay for a moment. All heads turned. An elegant woman in her late 60s, with sharp eyes and a steel-grey bob, stood up from the front row. It was Eleanor Shaw. She walked to the foot of the stage and looked up at the broken man. When Mr. Vance first brought this evidence to me, she announced, her voice carrying an iron authority that silenced the room, we were appalled. We knew Marcus. We knew his ambition. But we needed incontrovertible public proof to act without being tied up in litigation for years. We needed you, Alistair, in your boundless arrogance, to walk into this trap yourself. The twist landed with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just Leo's revenge, it was a corporate coup d'etat he had architected. Eleanor turned to the ravenous press. Finch Global will be launching an immediate and full investigation into the academic fraud perpetrated by our founder, Marcus Finch. Mr. Alistair Finch is suspended, effective immediately, pending his termination. Then she looked at Leo, and for the first time, her expression softened with genuine respect. And Mr. Vance, as the acting chair, my first order of business will be to table a motion to fund the Helios project, in full, with an additional 10% for damages, and a profound public apology. The auditorium exploded. It wasn't just a murmur anymore, it was a roar. Questions were screamed, cameras flashed with a blinding, relentless rhythm, and the name Vance was shouted like a battle cry. Alistair, still on the stage, looked from Eleanor's implacable face to Leo's exhausted but steady gaze, and something inside him finally, irrevocably broke. A guttural, animalistic sound tore from his throat, a noise of pure, impotent rage. He lunged, not at Leo, but at the nearest podium, sweeping a pitcher of water and glasses to the floor with a crash that was barely heard over the din. His security team, jolted into action, grabbed him, their faces grim. He was no longer their boss. He was just a liability they had to contain. They dragged him off the stage, his screams of lies, all lies, swallowed by the hungry roar of the media. In the ensuing chaos, David Chen fought his way through the scrum of reporters to Leo's side. His face was a canvas of shock, guilt, and dawning awe. "Leo," he began, his voice choked with emotion. I said horrible things. I called you a curse. I abandoned you." Leo turned to look at his old friend, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. He put a hand on David's shoulder, his grip firm. "He tried to bury us, David. He buried me in those scraps of paper. He buried you in debt and fear. He forgot I designed foundations for a living. You were scared. I was terrified. But a foundation is worthless if it can't withstand a storm. We're not finished. We're rebuilding." Eleanor Shaw joined them, a small, satisfied smile on her lips as she watched Alistair's undignified exit on a nearby monitor. "You build things that last, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice a low counterpoint to the surrounding noise. "It seems that applies to more than just buildings. The paperwork will be on your desk in the morning. Welcome back to the skyline." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and new beginnings. News channels ran endless segments on the spectacular implosion of Alistair Finch and the corporate fraud that had lain dormant for 15 years. Leo watched one report from the waiting room of the pediatric oncology ward, the sound muted. On the screen, a disgraced Alistair was bundled into a car, hiding his face from the cameras. In Leo's hand was a pen, and on the table before him was a new contract. Not for a skyscraper, but for Lily's life. The hospital administrator sat opposite him, smiling warmly. "The Lily Vance Pavilion is fully funded," she said. "Her treatment starts tomorrow." The weight of that simple pen felt more substantial than $1 billion in cash. As he signed his name, the ink flowing smoothly onto the paper, a single tear traced a path down his cheek and fell onto the page. A silent final seal on the promise he had fought so hard to keep. He saw Alistair only once more. 3 months later, he heard that the vast Finch family estate was being liquidated. On the final day of the auction, Leo drove up the long, winding driveway. He found Alistair alone in the cavernous, empty library, surrounded by dust sheets and ghosts. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, brittle shell. "Come to gloat, Vance," Alistair rasped, not bothering to look at him. "No," Leo said, his voice quiet. He walked over to a small display case that had been marked for sale. Inside, on a velvet cushion, was a single intricately detailed blueprint. The original design for the watch escapement, signed MF. "I came for this." Alistair finally turned, his eyes filled with a weary confusion. "Why? To mock me with it?" "Your father was a brilliant designer," Leo said, looking at the blueprint, not at the broken man beside it. "He was also a coward and a thief who poisoned his own son. That's a complicated legacy." He placed a cashier's check on the dusty mantelpiece. "I'm going to have this built. A one-of-a-kind timepiece, a tribute to the genius, not the man. A reminder that true brilliance doesn't need to cheat." He turned and walked away, leaving Alistair alone with the check and the crushing weight of a legacy he could neither escape nor redeem. A year later, the Helios Tower pierced the clouds, a shimmering needle of glass and green terraces. Leo stood on the observation deck, the city sprawling beneath him like a living blueprint. The wind that whipped around him was clean and sharp, smelling of ozone and altitude. Beside him, Lily, now 8 years old and vibrant with a health he had almost lost hope of seeing, was pointing at the clouds. "Look, Daddy, that one looks like an elephant." Her laugh, once a fragile whisper, was now strong and clear, echoing across the open space. It was the most beautiful sound in the world, a sound more structurally sound than any steel beam. He held the original, coffee-stained sketch of the tower in one hand, its edges soft with age. He had designed it in a cramped dorm room, a dream of a scholarship kid with worn-out shoes. He looked from the faded drawing to the magnificent reality rising around him. A testament not just to architecture, but to a foundation of truth. He had faced a monster born of lies and defeated him not with hate, but with a meticulously constructed blueprint for justice. "Daddy," Lily asked, tugging on his sleeve, her wide, curious eyes, his eyes, looking up at him. "Did you build this all for me?" Leo knelt down, pulling her into a hug, the warmth of her small body a grounding force against the vastness of the sky. "No, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair, the scent of her shampoo mixing with the clean air. "I built this because of you. You're the foundation."